If we install a new device in a computer and then all of a sudden we have a problem that we didn't have before, it's likely due to a resource conflict. So now we're going to talk about resolving resource conflicts and also about how to stop them from happening in the first place. So the first guideline is that we need to know the system resources that are already in use by a computer. We can determine this by going to Device Manager. And Device Manager is located in the Control Panel in the System applet. And in Device Manager we can select a device and then we can see each of the resources that are used by that device. We'll also need to know what resources the new device is going to need. Some newer devices aren't picky at all about the resources that they use, but many of the older devices are extremely picky. In other words, they'll only use a certain IRQ or they'll only use a certain DMA channel. So we need to know what those devices have to have so that they get what they need first. Then we install the device using the resources that aren't already used by the system. And then if we still have a conflict, we gather all the information from Device Manager, from CMOS, and from the documentation of the system board and the devices to see if we can resolve the problem. Some other guidelines are that if the device is a legacy ISA device, then we need to physically set the device's jumpers or dip switches to use a different resource. In other words, if it's an older ISA card and we need to change the resources that it's going to use, this is going to involve setting jumpers or dip switches. If the legacy device can only use one IRQ, then we use CMOS setup to reserve that IRQ for the device, so that every time the system starts up, it will reserve that IRQ for that device. If your PC supports PCI bus IRQ steering, then enable that feature. That way we can share more resources. Then using the PCI bus IRQ steering, tell Windows 98 to use a different IRQ for that PCI device. We can also use the CMOS setup to assign a specific IRQ to a PCI device. We could even move the PCI device physically to a different slot. This would cause the PCI bus to assign a different resource to the device. And finally, if the PCI bus IRQ steering is not working and is in fact creating a conflict, then we could disable the PCI bus IRQ steering. So we really just need to do some research, and knowing that the resources that each device needs to have that are used by a device will be determined by the computer based on the way that we've set it up, then we need to make some intelligent choices as to how to use the resources that we have available so that all of the devices get what they need. In our next section, we'll talk about an entirely different type of bus called a SCSI bus.